entails is that everyone likes to feel that we're normal, that we are what are the representation of what is consistent, what is we don't like to feel that we are the abnormal one. And I'm just going to put that out there. And so we'll use different traits, different situations to determine what is normal versus what is abnormal. And so I'm going to bring up a presentation here. And again, if you've done my intro to psych class, this probably looks very familiar, but it's very salient from what we're talking about with cultural psychology, is that there's really three ways that we determine abnormality. And the first way is what is considered the egocentric perspective. Egocentric perspective is just simply this, that we as individual human beings, separate from everyone else, like to feel that we are consistent, that we are normal, and that we are the basis for which everyone else should draw a conclusion from. So anyone who deviates from our frame of thought, from our frame of being, from our belief systems, from our attitudes and our ideals is abnormal. Okay, so if we want to bring this to light, we can look at again, we just got through a very religious weekend. So if you are steepened in and you are closed-minded into the idea that Christianity is the only belief system that can exist, and that anything that exists outside of that is abnormal, that's an egocentric perspective. That because you do not believe in Christianity, you by default are abnormal. Okay. Now, I hope because of the history of Christianity, you don't believe that, because Christianity became out of abnormality. But the idea is that when someone has a fixed and closed-minded point of view about what is normal and is abnormal, it is them who views that, not the broader circle of people that they are. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So we go from the individual level, what we view me as an individual as normal versus abnormal. And then we go into the social norms. This is our community level. This is our family level. This is whether we think that here in Tucson, Arizona, it is normal for us to have a Mexican, a Tana Otham, or a white neighbor. I know that's a strange analogy, but let me pronounce this a little bit more. Okay. On the social norm level, it is a belief that who you are around establishes what is normal versus abnormal. Okay. So the example I bring up is a very kind of this diverse idea that here in Tucson, where I live, I have a white neighbor, I have Mexican American neighbors, I have some Tohono neighbors, I have some Pasquaki neighbors, and it's very diverse. But where I was raised in northern Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, it was 90% white. And so it would be considered abnormal for me to have someone who is of color, who speaks a different language. And they are of the abnormal. They're not within my specific group. So that would be considered abnormal in that social contextual situation. Okay. And would I view any of their behaviors, if they were even similar to mine in that context, as normal versus abnormal? I would most likely consider them abnormal just because they are different from what my social norm is. Okay. Now let's consider the cultural level. So this isn't where we were brought. This isn't where we were raised. This is the broader culture. Okay. And yes, these egocentric views and social norms do influence how we view our culture. So you can see on a one level, you can see this here in the United States as an example. We have this divide between conservatives versus liberals. Okay. And you can see that based on our egocentric views and our social norms, that then that then makes us follow the cultural norms that we were with. So on the egocentric and social norms, if we follow the conservative, very stringent end of everything, then we will follow the right side, right? If we see diversity as important, if we see that people can have their individuality, we'll follow the cultural norm on the left side of this cultural divide. And each side of those cultures in our dictate will say that if you don't follow the rules and the structure that is established by the right and by the rules and of the authority figures, then you're abnormal. On the left, if you have such a quote unquote closed-minded view of other people and you feel that everyone should fit within a shoe idea, then you're abnormal. And that's the difference between the right and the left. But, and this is a thing that we have to say on the cultural level, is that both of them are based on a cultural value of individualism. That the individual then has the ability to make themselves either better or worse based on those rights, whether I should be diverse and I should be divergent, or I should confirm and I should be conservative. Okay. Both left and right value individualism and the individual's right to decide what side you're going to be on, the right or the left or somewhere in between. That's a cultural value that both the right and the left have. And that's what establishes abnormality within that cultural context. Okay, so here we have three different levels of values, each informing each other. And so let's talk about what about science? How does science determine abnormality? Well, we use more of a mathematical method in that we know that all human behavior, just like the growth of a plant, just like everything within nature, confirms to what's called a bell curve, where the majority of everyone is in the middle, and then certain populations are outside of that normal. Okay. And so if we were to look at this study of outliers, is what abnormal psychology and positive psychology is all about. So let's look at this from a, a diagram from happiness on this side, on the positive psychology side, to sadness on the left side. Well, we know that based on this bell curve, everyone is represented under this curve. We know that the majority of everybody lies within 96% of this bell curve. Okay. That on average, we all exist within this curve. And then there's 5% that are extremely sad, and there's 5% that are extremely happy. So clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, therapists, social workers want to know what makes this 5% less happy than the average. And then on the other end, positive psychologists, motivational speakers, all of those individuals want to know what makes this 5% more happy than the average of all of these people that are in between. So this is how kind of statistically, mathematically, we determine the difference between clinical and positive psychologists is we look for those that 10%, that 5% that is either above the norm or that 5% that is below the norm. And we want to know what makes these individuals tick, what is different between these two populations versus the average. Okay. Then we take it to the next level. So I know, and I'm not going to make this all inclusive, the majority of us in this class are going to experience any of these abnormal behaviors. We all are going to experience sadness, um, irregular sleep, delusions that we think we're either better or worse than someone, ideas of self-harm. We're all going to think at some time, am I going to be fired today? With paranoia. We're all going to worry. We're all going to be scared. We're all going to hallucinate. In fact, we hallucinate every day. If we go back to the sensation and perceptions lecture, we constantly hallucinate in our visual field because we have to fill in our blind spots. We're all going to experience all of these. Okay. So what makes an abnormal behavior, something we all experience, something that may be something that we need to seek help for, or what we would consider a psychological illness or a disorder or a mental illness? Well, There are some ways, and I'm going to say this with some caution, that before we move on, if you have been diagnosed with a mental illness, whether it be depression or anxiety or PTSD or ADHD or autism, this lecture is an academic lecture. And if you find something that is counter to your current treatment regimen, you need to go seek your clinician and your doctor or whoever is treating you for that and have this conversation with them. Do not stop treatment. Do not stop medication if any of the information we're about to talk about is counter to what you've been told, what you have been exposed to, because what we're about to engulf in is an academic conversation, not a clinical conversation. So I'm going to put this caution up here, but how do we define the difference between mental health and mental illness? And how does identity and loneliness, which we'll get to, influence our mental health, which I think we've already explored in this class, but is worth doing a further exploration, okay? When we talk about mental disorders, the definition on your right comes out of the Western Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And this is what, if you've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, PTSD, autism, ADHD, this is where this definition has come from. On the left is a summarization of all of this definition, okay? So what is considered a mental disorder, mental illness, psychological disorder, and the like? And all those terms are interchangeable. The first thing that we need to establish with a mental disorder is that it is a cluster of behaviors according to Western ideas. Okay. Meaning that when we go back here to this list, we can be sad, but it may not interrupt our sleep. It may not include a depressed mood. It may not include being worried. Okay. But when we combine sadness with irregular sleep, a negative affect, a depressed mood, ideas of self-harm, negative thoughts, repetitive thoughts and behaviors, then we're establishing a routine of a cluster of abnormal behaviors. And if you could guess, this probably looks something like depression. Okay. The second thing is that it needs to be deviant, meaning that we can't just feel depressed and sad and worrisome at work, but we have to feel that at home. We have to feel that at church. We have to feel that at school. Okay. If those clusters of behaviors are targeted towards only when I go to school, I feel those behaviors, it is the situation. It is something to do with that school setting that is igniting those behaviors. It's not that you have a disorder. And this is a thing with ADHD that is commonly creates misdiagnoses, is that often ADHD, hyper deficit, uh, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is sometimes a teacher will say the kid can't sit still, they can't pay attention, they can't do this. But then the parent may come in and say, well, they do fine at home. Grandma and grandpa can come in and say, well, they can sit through our house and sit through a meal. And maybe at a social situation, they do just fine. That child does not have ADHD. It's something to do with that school setting that is creating that deviant behavior, not the child. So, deviant is that the symptoms exhibit themselves across situations. They're not determined because they are at school, at home, at grandma and grandpa's, or somewhere else. Okay. The second thing is that they're distressful. This is that the individual recognizes that this is abnormal, that in these situations, I come up with these. Everyone else in the idea of depression, everyone else is happy to be there, but I feel nothing. That in this situation, I should feel something, but I feel nothing. Or in a situation that should be calming, I'm in a situation that is Zen-like, but I feel this incredible anxiety and this pressure and it eating at me, and I don't understand why. That is distressful. The third one is that it's persistent over time. That when we lose someone in our life, we will go through grief that will look like depression and anxiety. Most of us will experience depression in our life, but it'll alleviate itself within 90 days. So the difference between a disorder and human experience is that symptoms don't persist over time. People who have a tragic event occur in their life will have post-traumatic stress symptoms. But if those symptoms persist over an extended period of time, when that individual is in a safe, non-harmful situation, then that is something that signifies clinical need or some type of clinical intervention. And in the Western side of the definition of defining mental disorders is that they are maladaptive, meaning that all the deviant, distressful, and persistent over time symptoms make it so that I'm not able to go to work, that I'm not able to get out of bed, that I'm not able to go to a social function, that I'm not able to go to my niece or nephew's birthday. Okay, so it's maladaptive, meaning that it makes it so the person is not adaptive to their world. They're no longer being productive citizens of society. They're no longer being social and being part of the family or engaging with each other. Okay, and that's the maladaptive side. Okay, so these are the definitions based on Western ideas of what is a mental disorder. And the reason why I continue to say Western is because we'll see that culture does play a role in defining each of these attributes. All right. So I do want to mention the difference between mental health and mental illness. I think we've already gone through this in this class. And I just want to bring about this diagram between physical health and mental health. Is just because we have poor mental health, just like because we have poor physical health, doesn't necessarily mean we have a mental illness. It increases the probability of having a mental illness or a physical illness, but it doesn't determine our mental illness. So, for example, uh, a school shooter, mass shooters, most of them do not meet the criteria of having a mental illness. All of them do meet the criteria of having poor mental health in each of these domains: biological, psychological, and social. All right. So when we look at things like should we invest in mental illness versus mental health, I hope we start to invest more in mental health, just like we invest in going to the gym, eating right, having good people around us. I hope that we start to invest in this idea that we do have to have a healthy diet, we do have to have exercise, but we also have to have growth mindsets. We have to have healthy self esteem, self efficacy. We have to have a sense of identity and belonging, intimacy and intimate relationships. We have to have all of these things. And if we are going to reduce the mental health issues we have in society, we also have to recognize its strength as far as mental health is concerned. Hold on just a second, class. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. You probably saw it in the uh, thing. I had someone came and rang at our door. I apologize about that. Let's go on. All right. This is for Psych 101. So let me get through this. I think what we'll do for now, class, is I want to give a good um, overview of the history, especially from a Western perspective, about mental illness, because it does bleed over into some of the other cultural aspects. So, what I think we'll do for today, I'm going to stop my sharing since we did a definition of mental illness. We'll get into this. I'm going to um, um, hold on just a second, class. Just a sec. Hold on. Hold on just a second, class. I'm sorry. Hold on just a second, class. All right. So what I want to do on this Wednesday is um, we'll wrap up the history of